Good afternoon, everyone. It's George Kriza. I'm joined today by Pat Richie of the Table Group. The Table Group's a really important and exciting consultancy that is very closely associated with Patrick Lencioni. And Pat, how long have you been involved with the Table Group?
Let's see, Patrick recruited me over 17 years ago to be a consultant with the Table Group.
Interesting. So that's been a great long experience, hasn't it?
Yep, I was very fortunate. He didn't plan on recruiting me, but I went by his office to kind of hear what he did. And he said, Pat, you should become a consultant. And I said, that's great. What's a consultant? so everything I know, pretty much he taught me. So I owe him a lot.
And just briefly, you have a really interesting background prior to being a consultant. Do you want to share a little bit of that with us?
Prior to that, from 1981 to 1998, so as long as I've been with the Table Group, I was the team chaplain of the San Francisco 49ers. And so you can kind of see there, we were very good at the time that I was fortunate. I was not the reason we were good. Joe Montana and Jerry Rice were a huge help to me. And so they were winning Super Bowls, and Bill Walsh, and of course the great coaching staffs that we had. But I was fortunate to be there for all 5 Super Bowls with the 49ers as their team chaplain. And I also worked with great leaders like Dusty Baker at the San Francisco Giants and Doug Wilson at the San Jose Sharks, where I was the team chaplain as well. So I covered pro sports, and prior to that, I'd worked at Notre Dame and Stanford with their athletic department. So I was in sports ministry for a long time.
Wow, that's a really, really interesting set of experiences that you have. Now, I'd like to ask, or let's set the table just a little bit with our conversation. So one of the reasons Patrick Lencioni is so famous is he's written a series of books that have become bestsellers and very highly regarded throughout the area of business culture and business productivity, you might say. And so I know for myself, I found 2 of those books exceptionally powerful. And for me, those 2 books were The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive and The 5 Temptations of a CEO. Of course, he followed the 5 Temptations with the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, very tightly interlaced with the 5 Temptations. But I'd like to, before we discuss, and we're going to break into a breakout session, you might say, in a few minutes to discuss each of these temptations and what they mean. But there must be some problem that we're trying to solve, or that Patrick was trying to solve when he wrote these books. Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, remember, Patrick started out his career as a management consultant with one of the big consulting firms. And he often talks about how he worked early on with Meg Whitman, who's now the CEO of Hewlett Packard. She was a partner at this consulting firm. And as they worked together, they would often do great work. I mean, great management work, and would cost a lot of money for large clients. And one day it dawned on him that a lot of the work that they were doing, the company he didn't think could actually pull off. And I think it was Meg that asked him, well, why is that? And he goes, well, look, there's a lot of dysfunction inside the organization. They don't really trust each other. They've got issues about making decisions or holding each other accountable. So I think they may have wasted a lot of money on it. And she said to him, well, we don't do that kind of consulting. He said, yeah, but I think we should. And that really is what sent him down the path of starting to think about, besides being smart, which is what great management consultancies do, and we have great ones here in the country. Besides being smart, you also have to be healthy. And that means minimal politics inside the organization, minimal confusion. And I think if you ask most executives, they will say the problem is not that they're not smart enough, but they often are not healthy enough. And that's the big overarching thing we're trying to solve for, is helping transform companies into be very healthy. So in fact, they can tap into all their organizational smarts.
And when you look at the 2 books together, The 4 Obsessions and The 5 Temptations, for example, the first obsession of an extraordinary executive is to build and maintain a cohesive management team. So the second book falls right out of the first as the number 1 priority. And I wonder if you could give us a quick comment about why is a cohesive management team the number one priority?
It's because without that, you can't even create clarity in the organization. It's wherever we have cracks inside of an executive team that you're only going to condemn your company to struggle with bloody, unwinnable wars downstream. We often find, especially as you get a little bit larger in organizations, that there's these silos and these battles that go on. And I'm sometimes called by companies going like, well, we down here, we have this little battle. And I'll go, well, how does the executive vice president of these two different divisions or departments work with each other? And they go, well, not very well. I go, I don't know that we can solve it down 5 levels unless we talk about it up above. So I had the president of Kroger here in Texas. I live outside of Houston. That he said, boy, if you could fix those 2 things with an executive team, that would be very valuable to a CEO.
How much more challenging is it in a Fortune 500 company than a middle market company or a lower middle market company to solve these problems?
Yeah, it is more difficult in a larger, and I've worked with, I think, 8 of the Fortune 15, top 15 companies. And it is a little bit more difficult because of just the size of the organization. These are global organizations. And so if you want to start with that executive team, if at all you can, and get that team cohesive, then you've actually got a chance to impact a larger organization. In a smaller organization, especially if it's privately held, or it's an owner operator that was a founder, these organizations that are anywhere from about, I would say 25 million to about $500 million, they can make impact quite quickly. So just because the organization is a little bit smaller, the CEO is more directly involved, often knows everybody in the organization. The big global ones that I've worked with, it is much tougher.
Where would you say is the primary responsibility to solve these problems?
Oh, 100%. It's with the CEO. The leader is we've worked, it's not just me now. There's about 40, 45 of us around the world that work with the Table Group as consultants. And we will all tell you, if the CEO, if the team leader, even if we're talking about a division of a company, if it's a small, if it's a church, it doesn't make any difference. If the leader is not on board, this will unlikely ever happen.
Yeah, yeah. And yet, as you point out, the chance for success is really strong in a smaller organization. So I think that should give all sorts of entrepreneurs a tremendous amount of hope in order to transform their organization with revising their own behavior and revising their culture.
Yeah.
Because it's all part of a culture that's trying to be created, isn't it?
Yes. And again, remember, if you have that healthy organization, you can tap into all the smarts that you have. And many of the companies I work at have multiple PhDs, multiple MBAs from top Ivy League schools, and yet they don't function as well as they should because they're not very healthy.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie a ribbon around this, as I reread the 5 Temptations yesterday, one thing that really struck me in the fable was that the CEO, I think was his name Andrew, the CEO didn't even comprehend that it was his responsibility to manage his direct reports. That's interesting, isn't it?
It is. I mean, a lot of times people feel like when they get to a certain place on the organizational charts that now everybody's a free agent and they're not managed. You'll notice that even Tom Brady, with his old coach and his new coach, they still coach him.
Yeah.
So there's no superstars on any team. You really have to be able to be manageable. You've got to be teachable. I mean, we talk about in the ideal team player, you have to be humble, you got to be hungry, and you've got to be intelligent around how you deal with other people. So we call it hungry, humble, and smart. And you need all 3 of those to have a great team.
All right, thank you. That's a great introduction, Pat. We're going to do a wrap at this point, and we'll reopen the discussion to discuss the first pair of trade-offs.
All right.